take myself. I had to take myself off mute because I was still on mute. But, so I want to welcome everybody to today's episode of Wisdom Cafe Live. Meet the author. See, there goes my tongue stuck in my mouth. And I'm Bob Choat. I think I'm Bob Choat, the Transformational Grandmaster. My beautiful co-host over here is Dr. Sofie Nubani, the Queen of Laughter and Wisdom. Sofie, here it is again, a wonderful Friday evening. I'm here in California. You're all the way over there on the East Coast in Orlando, Florida. So,
and our guest is all the way?
All the way in Germany. You guys actually got me at 2:30 in the morning, so that's how much I love you guys. And I'm a little jealous, Bob, because you pointed, like, I guess this direction, and you said beautiful co-host, and I thought you were flattering me for just a second. Not quite.
Well, this guy, he's pretty cool. But I'm talking about over him. I should have gone like this.
Yeah.
But he is a good-looking guy, so.
Yeah, that's true. There you go.
Yeah. I'm not going to say beautiful because that's kind of like strange and weird.
Our shining star, it truly is. I mean, he is doing amazing work, and we're so honored and happy to be able to catch him because he's been on a go, busy between all his endeavors. And what I love about him is actually also the balance between that and family time. I really respect that about Frankie a lot. He's very professional and, grounded, and everything has its own place and location for his appearance and attention. And I think that really helps when we are, doing our endeavors and entrepreneurial work, especially when you're in business of guiding people, helping people, and inspiring people. It's almost like you have a commitment to really lead by your good example, because without you even realizing, a lot of people look up to you and they evaluate your behavior and then your teachings. And if they're congruent, you really make of an amazing leader. And that's something that Frankie's really had projected nicely to a lot of us. And we were so happy to have him on. And welcome, Frankie.
Yeah, you are far too kind, Sophie.
Yeah, welcome. I mean, this guy, he's been a digital marketer since 2007. And ironically, and we had talked about this beforehand, is that he's shared a stage with my friend Jabraham. And Jabraham is like a very well-known marketing guru, one of the highest paid marketing consultants of all time. And Frankie is also a shaman, because I looked at his stuff on the sacred journeys and everything like that, and I think his retreats, and that's pretty cool. So, and we'll talk about that as well. And he's helped countless people.
Maybe try the mute button again just to see, because I did put my headphones on just in case.
Okay, but so he's been involved in like I said, a digital marketer. He's been in magazines, numerous shows, and so much more. And I mean, there's a lot that we can say, and we're going to get more into that. But Frankie, again, like Sofie said, we're happy to have you on our show, and you can get more into all those things as we asked you the questions. But let me start, because I know you're a family man and everything. But let me ask you, what got you into doing what you're doing as a digital marketer, consultant, and everything like that?
Bob, that's kind of a loaded question. Like, I don't think anybody wakes up and it's written in their life path that you say, I would love to be a digital marketer. I would love to be the guy that puts advertisements in front of people.
But how did it fall into your lap, in a sense?
It was really interesting, because in 2007, I was just looking for a job. I was just trying to get paid. I had gone to school to be an engineer. I hated everything about it, but that's what I was doing. And you know, I had a friend of mine who was doing real estate in Florida, and he called me up one day and he said, "Hey, I wrote a real estate course and we're going to sell it on the internet." And I was like, "We?" And I was like, "No, you wrote a real estate course. You're going to sell your course on the internet." And he, very, very interesting character. He said, "Well, you'll figure it out." And he hung up the phone with me. And it was a really interesting time because in my little hometown of Windsor, Ontario, Canada, which is like 5 minutes from Detroit, Michigan. So it's like Canada, but close enough to hear the gunshots over and what's going on in Detroit. There were just like mass layoffs in 2007. And it was particularly hard hit because it's all automotive industry. Like if you're from that little area, everybody you know works for one of the big 3 car companies or a supplier of them. And everybody's kind of dependent on this one industry. And they were announcing like laying off 15% of the city in a single day, right? So it was a very difficult time, and I couldn't really get anybody to call me back. And so I said, all right, I guess we're building this real estate course. And I knew nothing about what I was getting myself into, but it brought me into this crazy world of digital marketing. I think it probably began with, like most people, with delusions of grandeur, where I'm like, I'm gonna make so much money off the internet that I'm gonna just drive a Ferrari and life's gonna be great. And then you get into the much deeper side of it as you go on, which is you realize it's actually a very profound tool to help people, because you have to understand how people think and how they work in order to help them. Because oftentimes, as you guys know better than anybody in the world, is they're their own enemy so much of the time. And if you understand ways in which you can communicate and bring that value to them, then what happens is people start to listen to you, and you get to actually do what you set out to do in the first place. So for me, it's been like this 13-year journey, just trying to help people and bring my stuff to the world, and not really knowing how to do that, and you know, getting a horrible 13-year self-education on that process.
Let me ask you another question, because it's interesting that you mentioned engineering, because it does take an analytical mind in that arena. I know because my father, he was an engineer. Besides being in the U.S. Army, he was an aerospace engineer, having reached his master's in that, and he worked for aerospace companies and everything like that. So it does take an analytical mind. And in the arena of marketing, from my own viewpoint, from what I've seen, a lot of the best marketers out there, especially now, because they have to understand the whole aspect of digital marketing and everything. How much did your background as an engineer apply or affect or help or otherwise in terms of what you do as a digital marketer?
You know, initially I would say probably none, and that was so much of the appeal to me, because I'm like, oh my God, I just want to get as far away from this engineering world. Like I didn't, you know, I think like I was like 17, 18 years old. You don't really know what you want to fully do with your life, and your guidance counselor says, you're really good at math and science, you should go be an engineer. And so I went down that road, but it's interesting as how it's all kind of circled back years later, because so many of the people I help are usually analytical minded, and they've worked either, you know, have backgrounds as engineers or accountants and architects and doctors and things like that. And I tend to understand them a lot more deeply than somebody who doesn't have that kind of like nerdy analytical, having gone to school and done that. So it's definitely played in, mostly in terms of the types of people that I get the chance to most work with. And we're an interesting crowd, because you know, one of the biggest challenges, like for people like us, is they tend to just overthink things. Like there's a certain segment of the population that doesn't have that issue, but there's also like a percentage of people that, like, you know, I say this lovingly, but it's just the truth, that are really kind of dumb and don't have the ability to overthink it. In some ways, that's a real blessing, because they're able just to do things without having all that baggage. And but then there's also the challenges of like being able to calibrate your actions. And so sometimes it's interesting to have to deal with people that need to see that whole deeper logical side before they can like jump into something and just take action with it. It's definitely been an interesting character type for sure.
Hmm. Yeah, I can see that. And during this, go ahead, Sophie.
No, go ahead. Continue.
So during this journey of as a digital marketer, uh, what are some of the highlights uh, that you've been able to discover that helped you to move you forward in terms of your own growth in that arena, but also in the arena of personal development?
Um, yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of big milestones, as you know, of all people, Bob. Is that it's kind of it's a never ending journey. You never definitely um, reach the bottom. And I had a period, and you mentioned the sacred plant stuff. It was around 2010. That was a really big one, and I had heard about something called ayahuasca, which, if you're not familiar with it, is considered by Western medicine to be like the world's most powerful hallucinogenic. And it was very, very interesting when I came across it, because I grew up in a family where, like, like both my parents are alcoholics, and my dad, like, kind of like really abused drugs. So I was like every way humanly possible against anybody doing something. And when I came across this, I kept reading about people who would, like, have a depression cured from one-time drinking, and they would come back with these fascinating stories of, like, afterlife kind of experiences. So this culminated for me to actually going down to Peru after, like, years of researching and having my own sort of, like, mystical experience. And it definitely, like, it was literally like I was just not a different person from one day to the next. So that was certainly a big milestone. And then there were a couple others that you mentioned. I actually got to share the stage with quite a few people, and one of the most profound talks I ever got a chance to listen to was by Joe Namath. The For those who don't know, he was like kind of like Tom Brady before Tom Brady. Like, he was the guy. I think you're muted right now, Bob.
Broadway Joe.
Yeah, exactly. And so, he was talking about, like, the idea that I think is really applicable to anybody. But he said, they asked him, like, how did you suddenly, like, turn it on in the big game and all the pressure, and there's millions of eyeballs and most people are really stressed. And he said that he had been practicing in his mind.
Can you just do this?
Sophie, you okay?
I think we might have lost.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm having, for some reason, a Wi-Fi issue, but go ahead.
Oh, yeah. So, he said that the way you do one thing is the way you do anything. And so for him, he had, like, practiced the Super Bowl like 1,000 times in his mind, so that by the time he actually got there, it was just another day, right? Like, he had practiced that show. So when he went to practice, there were already millions of people watching, and there were already extreme pressure moments. And so for him, it was, like, already kind of really dialed in. And so I realized there's something to be said for like, really, putting your all into that one thing, into your little practice moments. And what you'll find is when you're, whenever that big moment is for you, you're kind of just ready to go. And so I think that was probably another key turning point for me.
Yeah, that's very smart, because I know one thing I learned when I was in the Marines and Force Recon, we would practice 3 times as hard for the mission than the actual mission. By the time we got to the mission, it wasn't like, well, it was still challenges. We still had to overcome certain things that we didn't anticipate, but still, the training, what we did was, like, extremely, extremely hard, and we would do it over and over and over again. So, but the aspect that you brought in, especially the mental rehearsal part of it, is very, very powerful, very powerful. And I'm happy that you brought in Broadway Joe and what you learned from him.
Yeah, that's an old school reference. You're too young for that one, Sophie.
Okay.
Well, I remember the Super Bowl from way back then. Gosh, I'm dating my age, Bob. What the
Wow. I want to know more about your journey on your latest book, and the fact that you actually, from the get-go, sold, about 500 books right from the start. I was like, wow, that was so impressive. And pretty cool on your strategy. And I like the way you were so organized, because I remember we were like text messaging in our writing journey, in towards the end is when we kind of really synced in. And I'm like, wow, this is really cool. And then you were just right on. I was like, wow. I was very, very impressed of the results, and blessings and congratulations, because there's a lot of great golden nuggets in your book. Can you tell our audience a little bit more? What inspired you to write the book? Why did you choose that specific title? And who is this book for?
Yeah, actually, I got to say that was very comforting, Sofie, to meet you at that time. So here's the book for anybody who can see this visually. It's called Beyond the Agency Box. It's probably got a very narrow market, to be honest with you. Like, 99% of the world probably would not find this book very exciting, but it's for anybody who helps other people with, you know, advertising and marketing campaigns, working usually in their own house on their laptop. And it's a really unique world that's been kind of my world for 13 years. Like, you know, one of the interesting things about COVID is all these people are now suddenly working from home and having the complexities of Zoom and children walking around. And that's just like, that's how it's been for me for 13 years. And, you know, the biggest catastrophe in my world is the Wi-Fi signal doesn't work that day and you're traveling the world somewhere and you're like, oh God, the Wi-Fi. But what made me like really write the book is it's a really interesting business model. And I think anybody like, a lot of people could relate to this who are in business, is you are the product, and it creates this really, really weird situation because you're the product where you can end up like building yourself a prison really, really easily. And so when you start to have like financial success, what you get trapped in is like meetings and phone calls and just like unending requests for your time. And it's a difficult thing because often those people want reassurance about what you're doing because they don't necessarily always understand, like, you know, what are you doing on Facebook again or whatever. And what happens is you can end up like disappointing your clients because you're stuck like talking to them to make them feel good. And not that we don't love our clients. And so I would go through these cycles for years where I would like have financial success and I would want to burn my business to the ground because I would be constantly tethered to my phone and checking my email 50 times a day. And I didn't feel like I could disconnect for a weekend. And I was the only person I knew working on Sunday night at like 11:30 when everyone else was getting ready for bed. And so I was in this weird paradox where I would either have like a financially successful prison or I would be completely free to do whatever I wanted when I wanted. But I had no money and I would be broke. And so it was like, I would go through these cycles of like broke and do whatever I want, make a bunch of money and then be a prisoner. And I could never really figure out how to do that. And it took me probably more than a decade to really understand how to like not constantly build yourself a prison. And so when I finally like figured that out, I was like, I have to write a book for somebody else who's going through that same thing, because you can definitely relate if you've been there where you just like, you know, you start out with like wanting to provide a good life, like your business is supposed to serve you. And then what ends up happening in this business model is it owns you. And so I wrote it for like somebody who doesn't want to be owned by it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually perfect. And by the way, because I'm writing a book currently, Self-Mastery for the Home-Based Entrepreneur, and I think your book is probably going to be the ones I'm going to recommend in that book, because I think you're absolutely right. People are building a business, what they think is a business, but they are actually in the business instead of working on the business, because you need to work and build a real business, and it still runs even if you take yourself away. And like you and like a great majority of entrepreneurs out there, people that build businesses, they're stuck inside that business, like you said, stuck in a prison of the business, instead of in actuality running a system that runs itself in that sense. And it seems like that's kind of like what you figured out, right?
Yeah, and there's definitely been like a couple of things, you know, I think, and you know, like for anybody listening, one of the things that I learned in my journey that's really, really valuable is just the idea of like living intentionally. like usually in my business model, what happens is most people go out and they settle for whatever type of clients they think they can get or whoever shows up. But it's much, much more profound when you figure out like what you really want, and then you go out there and you intentionally, create that life through your choices and through your actions, and it's much ultimately much, much more fulfilling. And so part of the book is really just like a deeper lying, like underlying philosophy that says like figure out what you want and then go get it. And then this is all the lessons I've learned that can help make that easier. But like you said, it's having building the systems that support you, but only if that's what you want. Like some people love certain aspects of the doing, and I always say you should be doing what you love to do as well as what you're really good at, which the world really values. And when you put those things together, it just becomes a lot of fun. And then what happens is you're able to find ways to leverage it and so forth. And then there's another kind of like big idea, which is specifically kind of about just the idea of like a lot of people think that the value that they bring to other people is in the time and the energy and the effort it takes to bring something to them. And I experienced this in my world. Like I was just talking to a guy this morning who he sold a website to somebody new, and he was very, very excited. Naturally, like in their world, that's really exciting when somebody pays you for web design and you get a new client. And the challenge is now, though, his first thought is usually going to be, how do I go sell somebody else? Instead of like, how can I use this thing I've already created and bring value to somebody else? And so what happens is a lot of people end up like doing everything custom. And so there's no like real leverage built into it. And they just work far, far too hard because they think that the value they're bringing is all this energy and effort. But actually, if I had a choice, like personally, between somebody who says, I can build you a website and it'll take us, 3 months and we're going to have to talk 50 times, or somebody says, hey, I already built this website and you can have it and we can just tweak it to suit you. And it'll take us a day. And, the day version of that is much, much more powerful. When you realize that, you start to think about ways that you can bring value to people faster and less about like, how can I always be efforting and customizing and working really hard and just making your life difficult in that process, which, I might have did for a decade.
Correct. And by the way, what you just said is the same trap that coaches and therapists and consultants and people in the helping profession like that fall into. The same trap, what you just said. And instead of having a system already built out, they tend to customize each one for each and every client. Now, yeah, you can tweak it, but still you can build a system or a program or something like that where people can go through it, and instead of like everybody like, okay, I'm going to do this specifically for you. And Michael Gerber in his book, The E-Myth, he talks about that, that same kind of thing, that people fall into that trap. So yeah, and I'm glad that you brought that out. And people that are listening here, get his book, because he get Frankie's book. It's going to help you out a lot. If even if you're a coach or a therapist or otherwise you're running your own business. And I think it's super, super important. I'm glad that you brought that forth, Frankie.
Yes, thank you for the awesome shout out there, Bob. I would say, something you're alluding to, which is, even though I wrote this for a very narrow audience of, people who work on digital marketing campaigns, is that really anybody who has a service-based business where like you are the product or your service is the product, whether that's, in a physical location, like you mentioned, like to be honest, 90% of this would apply to a massage therapist just as much as a digital marketer, because they actually have more in common than they have, that's different. And I'm glad you mentioned the E-Myth, because that's a really great book for understanding what it is you do. And for those who aren't familiar with it, it's the idea that you take, the essential services and things you do and break those down into checklists and processes so that your quality and your standards are always given, but it's not always dependent on you to give. And at first, it's really hard for us those of us who are really close and care about what we do, because you want it done your way and you want it like done with a certain quality. But in letting go like that, it's actually better for your end customer, your end client, because you know, they get consistency that you can't provide because you're going to get burnt out doing it. No matter what you do, if you're always the product, at some point you're just going to need a vacation from being you and, you know, relentlessly delivering that. And so when you bring those pieces in, what happens is you're able to actually help people better by giving it up. So there's a deeper reason for doing that than just, you know, because it'll make you more money. But that is a very cool side effect of it.
So what was the inspiration of your book title?
Well, you know, it was interesting because I have like a very different philosophy on this whole business model than everybody else. Like everybody else is seemingly, so in my world, like I see a lot of people that post screenshots of like, hey, I made a sale and I made like $10,000, and everybody high fives them. And I did that for years. And what nobody tells you, if you do that long enough, what'll happen is if you're very like sales focused and you don't necessarily understand everything that comes after it, is you don't end up keeping people. And so like the average person in our digital marketing world usually like stays like 3 months with the service. And so you're essentially like rebuilding it every 90 days. And if you're really like sales focused, and like I like to say, nobody high fives you the 14th month in a row that you get a payment from a client, and you don't post any screenshots and there's nothing sexy about it. But there's something to be said about like really being able to go deep into your relationships and to do that meaningfully. And it's not done maliciously in my space. Like, believe it or not, like most marketers, despite the reputation they have, really, really do care about their clients, and they really, really want to see them win. It means a lot to them. But they really kind of do a generally poor job of like setting expectations for what's to come. And so what happens is they end up with people who are like kind of like disappointed. And it's a hard thing on your psyche because it's a weird business model where you're trying to keep people as long as you can, and they're trying to fire you as fast as possible. And so what happens is almost everybody that leaves you is disappointed. And so it like takes this toll on your psyche that like you get a new client and yeah, you high five and you made some money, but you know, in like 90 days, they're probably going to hate you. Right. And so all of this is created like kind of like through this structure of putting yourself in a box that says like, I do Facebook ads, or I run SEO campaigns for people, or I do websites. And I realized that if you wanted to help people, like you had to go deeper into those relationships more than just like, hey, I do this one thing and you can buy my one thing off the shelf, and into a place where you cared about them as people, where you were providing more value than just the surface level that what everybody else was doing. And you were constantly thinking about ways to make their lives better and easier. And then as you mentioned, Bob, like also running it like a system where it's predictable. So it's not like all dependent on you. And so I'm like, I couldn't put it in a box, and I was trying to describe it to somebody, and my girlfriend actually said, yeah, you're just beyond the agency box. I don't think people can. And I was like, oh, that's it. That's the line. So I went with that.
Yep.
Get it close to the screen. Get it closer to the screen. Let them see the behind the agency box.
Right.
Closer.
Nice.
There you go. There you go. So that's available on Amazon, right? And other places. Like, where can they get that?
Yeah, Amazon's the best place to go and grab it right now. It's thankfully
Perfect.
people have been kind, as
And
you know.
always write reviews. People.
Yeah, and you know, actually, it's been amazing because I've had strangers write me some nice reviews, and you never quite know, Sophie. Like as an author, you're like, you think what you wrote is brilliant.
It feels good.
But there's always like that 1% doubt that people are going to go, this is the biggest piece of crap I've ever seen in my life. And so it's always a little,
Oh yeah.
It's nice when, you know, somebody says, hey, this book really helped me. And I've actually gotten a whole bunch of emails from strangers, which is an exciting thing, saying like, hey, you changed my life. And I'm like, wow. Like I was hoping that would be the case, but I didn't necessarily know for sure that I had actually achieved that before I wrote it.
That's beautiful. Yes, yes. No, you did it really, and that's the results, because we're facing a pandemic. It couldn't have come in a better, because people are shifting and they're in a area of rebirth of their lives, their relationships, their careers. And the first thing that hits home mostly is their bread and butter. So if they can think and have tools that will assist them on how to transition and be in that space, and the processes that are displayed like in your book, that's very powerful and very helpful and needed, which is very useful, and that's what makes a good read in the end, right?
Yeah, and I just added it to my cart. So
Oh, sweet. Well, thank you for that, Bob. Another thing that I kind of wanted to really add for people, and you can relate to this, Sofie, is not just giving people good ideas in a difficult time with everything that's going on economically and politically and so forth. But in many ways, like, the hardest thing is actually not what to do. It's all the bad advice that people get that's conflicting, that makes them think all these things. So in my space, it looks like people think, oh, I got to have a website, I got to be #1 in Google, and they build themselves this like 1,000-point to-do list that they think they need, and it can be really overwhelming. Like, especially if you're not tech savvy. Like, when I got into this, I was not tech savvy. Like, we were poor. I did not grow up with a computer, so like staring at a screen trying to find like a broken thing in a line of code, like, what is this? So what I wanted to do for people is eliminate a lot of things that were really unnecessary to where you're trying to go. And I think some of the value that is in there. And like, for example, like when you get started in a digital marketing agency, like I just mentioned, like people tell you, well, you got to have a website, you got to be in Google. And I literally know people who will be fussing with their website for like six months and still don't have it perfect. But ultimately don't have any clients or business to show for it. And part of what I wanted to do is like really reduce it to the main thing, which is like, well, how are you actually going to help somebody, and how is that going to be different than what everybody else is going to do, and how can you strategically be more meaningful and more valuable to somebody in that journey? And when you figure out that piece, then you actually have something to say on a website. And when you have something to say on a website, it gets a lot easier to like do something with it. If you're just designing it to say, you know, Frankie Fihn, the marketing consultant, it doesn't really go so well. But when you have something like specific and meaningful to say, and so a lot of it was like actually just figuring out the pieces that could be removed for people. And I think unlearning is many times the hardest thing, not necessarily what you do learn.
So that's actually an important point. What you just said can apply to any business out there, because I see a lot of businesses in the coaching world as well, and other industries where people are trying to, #1, trying to be all things to all people. #2, trying to hit every single platform. #3, trying to be perfect and everywhere, instead of like, okay, this is my market, who I'm going to be working with, my specific market, and why I'm working with them and helping them and everything like that. Then you can build out, instead of trying to be everywhere. You know, like you may have seen on social media, some of the people you work with, they're trying to build up a successful Facebook platform, LinkedIn platform, YouTube platform, Twitter, this, and this, and this. What do you say to all those people that's trying to be all things to all people?
Well, obviously, you know, Bob, that's a recipe for disaster, as you described it, because when you try to be all things to all people, you just end up saying nothing to anyone. But deeper than that, like, you know, sometimes I'll get people and they'll say to me, like I was just talking to a guy who said they're trying to deduce, how do I say what I do to the world? And they're trying to like get it in one neat little 1-sentence package where it just goes, aha, and people get it and want to just like pay them a bunch of money. And it's actually far more simpler than that, is because before you can help people and speak to people, you have to help individual person in an individual situation with something. And usually, like I said, it's people don't understand that. A lot of marketers, believe it or not, have like a really big heart. They want to like really influence a bunch of people for the better. But what happens is they try and talk to all of them at once. And I remember just, you know, the conversation I had where I just said, well, tell me someone you've helped. And, you know, they'll say, well, I just did this one thing. And I'm like, why don't you just say that? Like, why do you got to put all that extra complexity? We help all these people to do blah, blah, blah. And just say like, hey, I've helped this one person to do this thing. Is there anybody else out there who would be interested in getting that same thing? And I can show you exactly how it works. And I think what gets lost for a lot of people in the technology and the trying to come up with these perfect, like creative taglines is at the core of it, like technology is just a tool to connect to people. So I'll get like people who say like, should I be using LinkedIn or should I be using the Facebook? Oh, no, I know I should be doing the Google, right? And I say like, well, hold on a second, right? Because like all of these are just tools to help people on the other side. Like, what are you going to do for a person? And when you understand like the person on the other side, the technology is really just like kind of secondary in a way. And that, I think that's really comforting for a lot of nerdy people who like me who don't enjoy the tech part of it. It's just kind of like a necessary evil. Because, you know, you think you got to build all these things and be all these places. You got to be putting content. Everybody's got to like be putting like endless amounts of social content. But when you realize at its core, you're just helping a person to do something that makes their life easier, better, faster, or helps them to do something with less mistakes, is that you can really just hone in on doing that. And when you do that, it's amazing how much easier the principles of business are. And so a lot of, you know, kind of like, you know, what I've been doing, and I guess what this book is doing, is helping people simplify that into, you know, I've been told I got to retarget this and I got to do this campaign and do that. I'm like, well, hold on here. Before we do all that, you know, what is it you're going to do to actually help somebody? Well, why don't we just try saying that? Because I bet you other people would be interested, especially now that you can say, I've done this for somebody else, and you can show an example of something like that. And I think people get lost in trying to be too creative and too quirky and not enough just really directed and honest about how you can help people and being clear about who you can help and who you can. And part of that is like radical self-honesty, Bob, because we do want to help everybody, but the reality is, you know, not everybody's going to be for you, and you can be clear that you're not all things to all people. You can really go deeper into the ones that you are meant to help and the ones you are meant to serve, you know.
Yes, I know that a lot of people, a lot of marketers have talked about finding your tribe. And I think finding your tribe, and you said it perfectly, find that one person that you can talk to, because a lot of people are like that one person. And that one person becomes, in essence, your tribe. Instead of trying to, okay, I'm going to work with this person, this person, this person, this person, and there's no relationship there, but I think I can help them all out. You find that one person, but there may be 1,000 more people or 10,000 more people like that one person, but you know, there may not be a million or a billion, but you're not going to be working with a million people. And I hear too many people, especially speakers, they want to become the next Tony Robbins. No, you need to find that one person. And I love the way you said that. And anybody that's listening, listen to what this guy says, because it's very important. And he says it so well. I've been trying to tell a lot of people the same thing. I love the way that you said that, Frankie. It's very, very important. Find that one person, and that one person becomes the start of your own personal tribe that you can work with, that you can help. And whether you're running your own agency, whether you're a coach, whether you're a therapist, whether you're running, you know, working people in the fitness industry or anything else, find that one that you want to work with, and then you can grow from there. But that's where it starts, and I'm glad that you brought that in. I'm so happy you brought that in. I can't even tell you 1,000 times enough. I'm glad that you brought that in.
Yeah, it sounds like we've been giving people the same advice. You know, I think there's nowhere that's more prevalent than the life coach. The life coach, like I coach people in life, especially the ones who, like, to me, the funniest ones are the ones who are like 20 years old. I'm like, you haven't even got started in life. Who are you to be life coaching? Right? But when you talk to these people, like often you'll say, like, they'll say, well, I want to life coach people. How do I put out life coaching or something like that? And then you say, well, who are you helping now? And they'll tell you a little bit about the people and what they're doing. And then you say, well, who are the ones you like really like are most passionate and like the people you most enjoy serving? And they'll say, oh, they're this. And you go, what do you do for that person? And I'll sometimes hear things like, oh, well, they were stuck on a campaign for like getting press in the media. And so I wrote a bunch of things and we got covered. And they really liked it because they were like a CEO at this company and they didn't really have time to do any of those things. And I'm like, well, instead of trying to coach people in all life situations about all life things, it sounds you're really happy doing this like kind of narrow thing for this narrow type of person. Gee, I bet other people in that same situation would probably be interested in that. Do you ever think about just doing that? And a lot of times, I always say life leaves clues because, you know, like there's an exercise in the book about finding your perfect average person, and it's not theoretical. It's like really being honest with yourself and looking at your experience for like, who are the people you've least enjoyed ever having to work with, or even if they're not in a business sense, like the relationships that drain you, that suck the life out of you, that are just not fun, they're not your people. And then like, who are the ones that like, you know, they say thank you. They're easy to be around. You get to just be yourself. You're valuable and helpful and meaningful to them. And you start to look at like, what are the commonalities in those two things? And when you get clear on that, you can be very intentional about like, hey, why don't I make my life, my business about this thing that I can make a great difference in the world, but also will bring you a lot of fulfillment and enjoyment. And there's something that can't be said about that whole thing for just creating it in such a way where you enjoy the process. Like nobody talks about, in my world anyway, they only high five. Like if you post a money screenshot, you get a high five, but nobody says like, hey, I'm just enjoying it, whether it's working or not at the moment. It's making me happy. And when you do that, I think the game of business actually gets easier because it becomes like quite literally a game where you're helping people you care about in a way where you can deeply help them. And even when it brings you challenge and hardship, it still has its like moments of fun. And I think a lot of people would really benefit from having a life that was just more fun and less serious, especially if you got engineering brain like some of us, where you grew up where it has to be all serious and all technical all the time.
Yes, and that's an important distinction. I remember years ago that I had worked with a client, and this client demanded so much and always yelling and screaming. A lot of money. I mean, it's been one of those screenshots you put up, and once I got done, once we got through the year, and this client wanted to sign up for another year, and I ended up finding another coach to work with this client because I did not want to work, and this client was going to double the amount. And I said, nope, I'm you know, I had to say that I was working and I had already other clients and everything. So I found another one, and this other coach called me up about a couple months after I started working with this client, and just, why did you put this client on to me? There's a lot of that, yeah.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. We, I say like one bad client can ruin your entire life and business, not just like financially. It's a weird thing because if you get in a situation where somebody like brings you a big paycheck, but also like a massive amount of headaches and misery with that big paycheck, it's like this conflict. And I had a situation very similar where I had a client who was just like a really negative complainer type, and wanted to talk on the phone a lot to complain about people. And I would just sit there for an hour, but also because the amount of money he was paying me, at least at the time, I didn't feel like I could say no. And so I would just listen and roll my eyes. And one of the things is, you know, to get out of that is being, when you're more intentional about doing it the way you want to do it, what happens is those people just don't show up because you don't speak to them and you don't try and speak to them. But I totally empathize with anybody who's in a situation where they feel like they have to take somebody like that. So I can feel you on that one, Bob. But it really will take the whole fun out of it. And there's nothing worse than getting a big paycheck for doing something you hate. because that's the fastest way to a prison in my book, because you feel like you have to do it and you're stuck in this situation, but it'll just drain the life out of you, and it'll make taking the next steps harder, because you think, am I just going to get another person like that? Like, imagine I had 2 of these people, or 3 or 4. You're like, oh my god, like this, that would be the worst thing ever. But when you start to do it where it's fun and you have your people, then you start going, wow, I can't wait to get the next person, right? I can't wait to see who's going to show up next. And I only know that one from making that mistake as well. So, you know, if you're listening to that, please don't do that, and get it right from the start, because it's a lot more fun if you just do that on day one.
So this person over next to you, Sofie, she was one of my clients, and so amazing to work with and everything. She's really growth-minded. So I got lucky with her as a client to people that like the one I told you about, but I've had others in the past, and like what you went through. They're complaining, they're yelling, they're all this kind of stuff, and they want to talk about this and this and this and this, and they wanted to be there at a moment's notice on the phone. And like you, I abided to that, and I looked at my time that I put into that, and I said, this is not worth it. It
Yeah.
is not worth it at all. And again, somebody else could coach people like that. I'm gonna find more Sofies out there and work with them. Not in terms of having a business relationship like what we have now, but in terms of like just having a joy, watching them grow and take action, and just enjoy that kind of process, and the fact that you brought this forth that can work in any, like I said, in any industry out there. And your book, I think people should grab it. I don't care if you don't run a digital market agency or any kind of agency. Just think of your business as an agency, and utilize the tools and everything inside that book. And I can't wait to deep dive into it and just extrapolate. And
You're gonna love it.
Especially because I know you've read like 10,000 books. So that's quite a compliment that I made the list.
He's a reader. Let me. And
Well,
it's so interesting because I can't hear you.
go ahead, Sofie.
Yeah, well, I think she's having a little bit of connectivity issues.
Oh,
These are the joys of the tech, right?
Yeah, it happens. So,
I might just go back. I'm gonna get back off and get back on
okay, go ahead.
and see if that helps. Right?
Yep. Yeah, those things happen. Wi-Fi issues and everything, and oh boy, see what happens.
Yeah, the joys of tech.
The joys of tech. Uh, yeah, again, and I tell people this, that while your book is targeted to a certain audience, I think anybody listening in right now, if you're running any kind of business, especially a home-based business, you're starting out, extrapolate, go there now, go to Amazon like I just did, and grab Frankie's book and see what you can extrapolate, utilize into your own business, because you're going to see that in business in general, especially when you're starting out as an entrepreneur, there's going to be a lot of similarities. Get my tongue twisted there. But you're going to be able to learn and utilize and apply. And so wherever it says, like a marketing agency, say, instead of marketing agency in your own mind, say, well, this is my coaching business. How can I utilize this in my coaching business? How can I utilize this in, like I said, my massage therapy practice? How can I utilize this in my fitness business? How can I utilize this in my food business, or for this and this and this? So it still can be applied, just transferring the names from one area to another, correct?
Yeah, there's a really good story I have about that. I have a client who he's kind of like, I call him an accountant or an entrepreneur who's playing the role of an accountant. So his business is, he has an accounting firm in Houston, and I met him at a legal conference. And when I met him, because we were at a legal conference and he was dressed in a suit and tie, I just naturally assumed he was a lawyer. I mean, that kind of like makes a lot of sense. And he said to me, "No, no, I'm an accountant." And I said, "Well, what are you doing here?" And he said something to the effect, "Well, there's no real like accounting conferences like this where you get to learn the business of it. But 95% of this is exactly the same, right? Like, yeah, there's nuances of the delivery that are different, but as far as like the building business and hiring people and getting it out there, like all of that is the same for all of us." And I realized that we have, especially like service business and like you said, work from home, like we have more in common than we have differences. So there's actually like the second chapter, I lay something out called the 5 stages of agency growth. And it's the idea that where you start, where you're like kind of just like a freelancer, just working for yourself, you're doing everything. And then eventually you get big enough where you have to hire some staff, but you're still doing the work mostly. And then you get big enough where you're like a full-time manager where you don't do any work, but you're managing people, and there's all these nuances of being a manager. And then you eventually get to the role where you have like a real stable business and you're now like a real CEO, not just as a clever LinkedIn title, but you really, really are running it like a CEO. And then, most people don't get that far, but if you want to, you can take it to the level of franchising where you're like building multiple locations and maybe multiple different niches, and you have everything like systematized and organized, and you're running at that level. And I think in my thing, most people don't necessarily want to get that stage, but that's the journey. But I could have just as easily said the 5 stages of massage therapy growth, or the 5 stages of growing a law firm, and those same stages of first starting out working for yourself, and then having to hire people, and then becoming a manager, and then becoming the CEO. They're all exactly the same. So I don't think it's necessarily unique to this industry. I wrote it just because, it is a little bit of a lonely world. There are some nuances to like working on your laptop, staring at a screen in the middle of nowhere. But definitely, like you said, there's more that's the same than that's different. And I think if somebody goes to it with open eyes and sees how it could apply to them, they would actually get like a whole lot out of it.
Nice. I know Sofie, you're back on, and we lost her again because we're coming towards the end here, but I want Sofie back on. I cannot get off without her.
We're less attractive, but it's just you and I think.
No, you're a good-looking guy, and Sofie is absolutely stunning, and me, I'm just this old guy on the West Coast.
Yeah, but for tell everybody about your birthday coming up on Monday and how great you look for your age, because there's something to be said for that.
Well, yeah, I keep challenging myself, and what I didn't say to you is that for over 10 years I've been doing parkour. You know what that is?
No, but it sounds cool.
You ever watch these YouTube videos of these young kids going over obstacles off of buildings, things like that?
Oh yeah.
That.
Wow.
I was doing the same thing when I was in the Marines and Force Recon, but it was I had equipment on back then, going over obstacles and everything, and so to me it's like nothing other than my parkour fell in 2013. I busted my face up on concrete, but other than that, I just love challenging myself and see how far I can go physically, mentally, things like that. But
that's what I think growth is really about. At some point you start, it can be an addictive process for people like us that are very growth oriented, just to see how far.
And I think I lost you, Frankie. Uh-oh. Oh, are you back?
I'm back.
Okay, good. We still haven't, so we got Sofie back for a second there, then we lost her again. So I'm going to transition because I know we're getting down toward the end, and as we're approaching the hour mark, I want to find out what's your favorite quote and why.
I've been a really big fan of the quote. I'm probably going to butcher it, but the Einstein quote where education is what remains when one has unlearned everything from school.
Mhm.
And that's not necessarily like a knock at school, but I think so much of like growth is actually when you get into unlearning and challenging the things that you were sure at one time were true, and finding out that they were actually just assumptions or beliefs in your paradigm. And they're the hardest kind of learning and growth to make, because you can't always see your blind spots that way. And sometimes they're just built into our operating systems. But what I love about it is it's a reconnection to the simplicity of things. And like we mentioned in MySpace, like, you know, how that shows up in like digital marketing is there's a lot of times people show up to me with all these things they've been told they have to do in order to be successful online and to build a business. And, you know, so much of that unlearning is like, before you start, you know, trying to change your SEO tags and this and that, like who are you going to help and how are you going to help them? When you get clear on that, you know, there's often like better, easier, faster, more simpler, more direct, more meaningful ways to do that. And so I really love the idea of unlearning the kind of like things that we've all been told we have to do, and challenging the idea that, are they really have to's, or have we just been told that we have to? And when you change that kind of paradigm from I have to do this to I choose to do it, there's a whole world that opens up, and a whole simplicity of things where it can actually be easier. And I'm sure you guys, of all people, have experienced this, but I call it being in the flow, where things just kind of unfold very beautifully and naturally, and you have a lot more fun in that journey. And so much of that, I think, is about unlearning seemingly things that we've all been just conditioned to believe are necessary, that are really not really necessary.
Which is in essence the aspect of life. We tend to focus on overcomplicating things instead of focusing on the simplicity. Because I have a martial arts background, and martial arts is an example of something that started off with a focus of self-defense, of getting from here to there. But then it added in multi-levels of complexity to the point where it's become ineffective in terms of delivering good self-defense and all these other things. And I studied multiple martial arts throughout my life, and have like multiple like 5th degree black belt and higher in a lot of arts. And I'm now delving back into the simplicity even of the martial arts, the simplicity of even marketing and everything. And Jabraham talked about that as well. I remember back in the day, and he had all of us read Obvious Adams. Did you ever read that book?
No, but I'm a huge fan of Jay, so I think I'm gonna have to.
Obvious Adams is I bought a whole bunch of copies that I ended up selling of original. I found a warehouse that had the original copies of Obvious Adams from the 50s, that it was all packaged and unsold. Somebody found it, and I ended up purchasing half the warehouse of them. Yeah. And I still have a few copies left. I still bundle together, but I still have some of those left. And I was selling them because Jay mentioned it, and a lot of people didn't know about it. And they're just little booklets and everything like that. And I was thinking, yeah, this is an excellent booklet, even though it came from a time back in the early 20th century and everything. And so I'm glad that you brought it up. We tend to, like, even our education system tends to overcomplicate things, and you're an engineer, and we tend to over-engineer certain things too, as well, instead of looking at the simplicity. Yeah, great quote by Einstein.
Yeah, no, I got one more quote to throw in, since you're a martial arts guy, which is, you made me think of the Bruce Lee one, which I'm sure you've heard. I don't fear a man who knows 10,000 kicks. I fear a man who's practiced one kick 10,000 times.
Yes, yes.
I love that one so much.
Mastery of that one. Yeah, and
Yes.
yeah, so that's perfect. I know that Sofie, you did ask him about the 3 tips, right?
Sorry, I missed that. What are you
Yeah.
asking me?
So Frankie, one of the things that, because our audience is listening in, and based like on your experience and what you've done, what 3 things do you want to leave our audience with that they can apply to their life? And you know, and it doesn't. It could be in business uh, or otherwise.
Yeah, things that I think apply to anybody. The first really, and I go into this in the book, like I said, in my world, you get big high fives if you sign a new client and get a big paycheck. But actually, the whole point of that whole journey is actually to go deeper into relationships and to connect more deeply and not to think so much about people as like transactions and to start thinking about them as like the relationships itself as being the asset. And I go into the book why like that actually makes your business life a lot easier, because when you understand that the relationship is the asset, you understand how to really use it. And I think we could all benefit from that. Like even if you're just trying to connect more deeply with, your mother, learning to like forgive people and all those things. So I would say that's the first thing, is like don't look at things as like a one and done, and start looking at the real connections that you're making. And we got into this a little bit, but I think I'm a huge fan of the second one, which is just living intentionally. So few people do it in our society. Most people do what they think they have to do. They take the job they think they can get. It's interesting because I was reading a study by a CEO, and he said they posted 2 jobs for a $50,000 kind of like entry level position, and then they had a $350,000 like managerial position per year. And he said he gets 100 times more resumes for the $50,000 position because most people just don't think they deserve a higher end position. And my message is obviously very counter to that. Is whatever you really want would really make you happy, and it's not always the $350,000 job, but it's a metaphor for the fact that very few people go directly for what they want because you just don't think they can have it. And you would be amazed when you do that, because firstly is you can, and secondly is what most people don't realize is you could fail at your plan B anyway, right? Like you can go after your plan B and it can still not work out. You might as well at least go for your plan A. And then the last thing I would say, which really helps a lot of the people in the business world, is really just think more about your leverage, because what happens is, like I said, in my business, people build themselves a prison really, really fast. And believe it or not, people aren't paying you for all the time and energy you put into something. They're paying you for what that thing you created is going to do for them. And when you figure that out, you can figure out ways where you can give that to them and make that work for a lot of people, and not have to like reinvent the wheel all the time. And in doing so, you can actually get ahead, and you can make people really happy and make a difference in people's lives. And Sofie, you know better than anyone that a book is like a perfect example of that, because it allows somebody to read something you've thought about for a long time and analyze very deeply, but you're not standing there reading the book to them every time, right? It's a very leveraged tool in doing it. And there's a lot of ways that you can use that kind of principle to make your life easier, where not everything has to be about your time, and then you can spend time with the people you love and do what it is that you really want to do, which for me is like just hanging with my 2 little daughters, who I heard my cutest
And I love the pictures. I always admire that. Yes. Delegation and duplication is very key for entrepreneurs. And if they don't get to that level, they're going to be worn out and run down and won't be able to touch and impact many lives. It is really crucial, because when you're really dedicated on a mission with intention and clarity of what you would like to do, you're going to need that. Otherwise, you're going to be, your attention surplus is going to be depleted, and you won't be able to show up at best to any of them at one point or the other. So yeah. I really agree about like how you mentioned earlier about the one person, as if you are talking to one person. Focus on that, and the message can be clear to many others who are in that same area of need of your service. And then now you're narrowing down a lot of areas that could have been expanded for just energy that could be wasted in the end of the day. And you are able to restructure and redesign manuals for how you would like to serve in a more effective way. So definitely love that. And I love your tips that you gave, because intention creates meaning, and your clarity and your awareness of what you would like to spend time on and how is going to really be motivating you on how you're going to go by and creating systems that are going to be more sufficient and effective for your delivery. And this way you can be managing and regulating your emotions more steady. So when you're in service, you are also being rejuvenated and also at your best potential, versus sacrificing your health for being in service with good intention. And in the end, what you really wanted to do doesn't get accomplished, but also your health gets compromised. So that's a very valuable tips that you gave. And I definitely agree. And this is one of the reasons we love shows like this, because when people like you, Frankie, come along and they share their life experience and what really worked for them and what's working, now a one person who's starting can gain so much wisdom and eliminate and avoid such pains or sufferings or losses, whether it's time or money or relationships. And that's why learning and being open. But again, like you said, there's a lot of people there not bringing in the truth, and people get confused. Who are they going to follow? But I guess when we're really having people like, okay, here's Frankie, this is kind of his philosophy and his policy of operation. And this is a system that he suggests that worked for many. And I'm giving you a shortcut of your time and effort. Now, instead of you taking 10 steps to get to that finish line, you only need 5 or 4, because you're always going to need to put in your effort, no matter how great a mentor or a coach is. But then you're going to have the layout and displayed in much more simplicity and easiness for you to follow. So we're so grateful to have you on our show, Frankie. And I'm sorry for the little technical difficulties on my end. You know me, I would have loved to speak more with you.
Yeah, well, we're going to have you do that again, Sofie. Frankie, again, thank you. But before we go, want to find out, how can people best get a hold of you if they want to hire you for your service, for speaking, for coaching, for even doing workshops or otherwise?
Yeah, you can, if you'd like to connect more, you can go to beyondagencyprofits.com. Of course, there's in the back of the book, I've got contact info. So if you guys, I love hearing from people. So even if you just want to write me and say that, you got one good idea, that's worth it to me to know. So those are the best ways.
We're going to put his information in the comment section as well for those people to make it easier and more directed. We can put also the book link as well. And that was going to even get people to know you on a little bit deeper and wider share, which is very valuable and precious. So make sure, Bob, that we do that for him. And Frankie, please, if there's anything else that we can add to help our listeners to be directed in an easier way, whether it's email, whatever works. I mean, again, we're going to put the link in. If there's anything else, feel free to share that too.
Yeah, I like to keep it simple, so not all of us can write a super novel on film.
Got it. Yeah, again, thank you for being on our show. Love your stories, love everything, your tips, and so much more.
Good
Frankie,
energy, positive, good energy.
Positive, great energy. Yes. And hoorah from the show.
Hoorah!
Yep.
Well, thank you guys so much. I think I'm good. Actually, it's in Europe, so we're in the wee hours of the morning. So I'm gonna go back to sleep after you guys.
All right. Well,
Definitely
thank you
go
for your time. We really
Good night,
appreciate it. And thank you, everyone listening. Blessings, and we'll see you next week.
Bye, everybody. Bye.
Bye. Bye.